Hang in there. I got about 20 seconds to go before the top of the hour. I'm watching Vice President Joe Biden take questions, and pretty interesting. Let me see if I can shut this off so I don't have this coming in my ear here. And we're live. Good morning, everyone. A late morning. I was the Biden interview ended just about the time I was going live here, so I was able to listen to some of the Biden interview. Not sure I have much feedback from it. In case you're wondering, he seemed to wander a bit, maybe a bit more than anybody else would in that kind of environment where he's getting questions from the media. But I don't know. Maybe I'm watching him too closely because I think there's something wrong with him or something. We hear so much about this, but be interested to hear what your comments are on the Biden interview if you got to watch that. So maybe I'll look at that a little bit closer. So Wall Street Journal came today. I read it, and I'm going to jump all over today, as I a lot of times do, from article to article that I think you might be interested in. So hang in there. We'll get through it, and I think you'll be better informed and better thinking. And that's what, if anything, I want you to think about these in the broader scheme. Sometimes we just read news and we're done with it, but it ought to invoke thought in you and say, what are they saying? What are they not saying? What does it mean? What does it mean long term, and so on? So first article: U.S. is accused of Chinese IP, intellectual property. So the TikTok deal that President Trump has said, look, this better be owned by a U.S. company very quickly, or we're going to shut it down because of their issue with taking information from users that they lied about. By the way, they did lie about it, and then finally fixed it. But they were taking information from users. They didn't inform users that they were doing that. So China is now saying that TikTok has this AI, artificial intelligence, that determines what videos all these young people want to see and prioritizes those and informs the users of those. So, and what they're saying is that IP is got to be approved by Chinese authorities before it's transferred to the U.S., and that they may not allow that. And so they may allow the company to be bought, but not the AI technology to be transferred along with it. So first of all, when you think about this is kind of rich, right? Those of you who studied China, and I've traveled in China extensively, and so China is stolen U.S. IP, and as a buddy of mine said, manufacturing along with it for years. And by the way, in many cases, they've held U.S. companies hostage. They say, if you come over here, we can't protect your IP, and therefore we own your IP if you come into this market. And they held the world's largest consumer market and growing rapidly, at 10, 15%. They held that over their heads, said, you want to come here, we own your IP. So this is real rich for a company that has done business by stealing. I have a friend that worked for, let's just say, a large networking company. He will know who he is when I'm talking about him. And he said, some of their code was stolen with some of the comments in place. And if you pulled their code out, the Chinese code, the networking code out of their products, it was identical to the U.S. networking code with even the comments in it that clearly were put in there by the U.S. company. So they've stolen things shamelessly. I've traveled it. I mean, there's shopping malls you can go to in China that the whole mall deals with counterfeited goods. And everything from, they've counterfeited Honda motor vehicles, not motorcycles, I mean cars, Honda cars, you name it, they've counterfeited and done a super job at it, by the way. They're really good at it. So for them to say the U.S. is stealing IP is really rich, as the term goes. The young people say, that's really rich. Could nix the deal. The question would be on the buyer. What are you buying? Are you buying 3 billion users? I think maybe that's what you're buying. The IP, I can't imagine this being very difficult IP. Facebook's already come up with, what do they call it? Reels, I think, REELS, that copies a lot of what TikTok does. So I got to imagine that some good coders in a room for a month can come up with this and recreate it. So maybe it's not a big deal. Interesting item, though. I could care less if we get TikTok or don't. I had it one time to look at it for about 5 minutes, and I was bored with amateur videos from real amateurs real quickly. Though I understand if I was 14 years old, it'd be me. California's going to curb evictions. So, obviously the pandemic has created a situation where a lot of renters can't make rent. So California's already had a law from March back saying that the landlords had to hold off the rent from people who were affected by the pandemic. So now California is kind of straightening this out and putting some rules around it. And so what they're saying is, from March to August, that time frame, that back rent will be converted to consumer credit. Hang in there with me here. It gets a little complicated. In September to December, they're going to have a new eviction rule. The renters must pay 25% of the rent during this time period, and the rest will be converted to consumer credit. So if you're a landlord, what you had before was credit with the threat of eviction. So that works pretty well. I got to tell you, as a former landlord, I'm not in it anymore, but as a former landlord, the threat of eviction is a big deal because people have to go somewhere else. They have to have a house. And so they'll not pay other bills and make sure that they pay rent to keep from getting evicted. So now in California, what they're going to say is, landlords, most of your debt is going to be consumer credit debt. It's no problem. Go to small claims court and you can get paid. Well, foolish. We know what consumer debt is, okay? There's nothing to back it up, right? Before you had eviction to back it up. And obviously, there's lots of people that, retail operations that wouldn't give consumer debt to some of these people. They may give them a car loan because they can go retrieve the car. They've got something to back the debt up. But in this case, they've got nothing. So what do you think the collection rate of that consumer credit is going to be? And by the way, they won't be able to, they'll start paying rent as soon as this program is over, right? We all know what they're going to do. They're going to start paying rent. They won't get evicted then. And then they're going to have hanging over the landlords months and months of, and by the way, in California, we're talking $2,000 and $3,000 a month. So for 6 months, we're talking $18,000, $20,000 of consumer credit not going to be paid. Okay. So again, the state government and the federal government's done the same. We'll talk a little bit about that later. Has picked winners and losers. The renters are the winners are the renters. That rhymes, doesn't it? The losers are the landlord. And they've taken, probably the government has come in and we talk about the taken clause of the Constitution. In my mind, this may result in lawsuits, big lawsuits about taking, because you're now taking a form of debt that's the highest form of debt. Rent is a pretty high form of debt because of as I talked about, the risk of eviction, and now you've turned it into one of the lowest forms of debt there are overnight, and they're not going to get paid. And trust me, people who have not paid rent for 6 months have no way to pay back rent. There'll be a few of them that do, but most of them have no way to recover. These are people with a few $100s in savings. They cannot handle something like this. New York State delays school again. So now they've delayed the start of school. They were going to start September 10th. Now they're going to make it the 21st. So why did they do that? Why do you think? Who's running New York schools? That's right, the unions. Here we go again. The unions were setting up a potential strike because they didn't think they were ready to go back on the 10th. And so they're setting up a potential strike. School officials backed off and said, okay, we'll move it back to September 21st. By the way, the unions had a bunch of demands. They wanted everybody to be tested, staff and students, before school started, and to be tested every 2 weeks. And they didn't win that, by the way. So, by the way, charter schools are opening in early September with a hybrid model. So, which I like this. The parents are in charge. See, instead of the union is in charge in public schools, in charter schools, the parents are in charge. So the parent decides what the risk level is and says, no, I'll keep my kid at home and we'll do online to the classroom. Or they say, no, I think the risk is manageable. I'll send my kid to school, and I think it's better off for my student with the risk involved, and I'll send them there. And so the hybrid model gives them both choices. But the teacher doesn't get a choice in this. Teacher must teach. And with protections in place, obviously, masks and plastic screens in front of the desk and so on, that they're adding an additional spacing and so on. So again, charter schools are winning, and because they work for the parents. Public schools are run by and run for unions. Don't get me started on this. I've got a pretty set belief around this structure that and believe me, talking to school board members, ask a school board member what their number one problem is. Unions, unless you're a left-leaning person who thinks that that they're put there by the unions, but it's a huge issue. So who's running the school? The observation, the question of the day is, who's running the school? Well, I think we know. And by the way, the other question is everything else being worked to get them ready for school? I mean, they've got all these discussions going on, and I'm missing some of the details. Like one of the schools was commenting and says, we can't go back. We don't even have masks yet. And I'm thinking, where have you been all summer long? You actually from February of last year, but all summer long, you've known you've got to have a massive number of masks to get ready for public school. What have you been doing? My belief is not much. And by the way, some of them are saying the ventilation systems haven't been reworked yet. Again, I'd say you've had all summer long with the school shut down, and you could tear that whole ventilation system apart and rework it. Where have you been? Fourth article, Harvard. So talking about ventilation system, Harvard University research shows that ventilation systems are crucial in curbing the virus. So the science is not settled on this yet, and we keep going back and forth. And I could argue the same way about masks, by the way. But it appears like ventilation systems are pretty important in curbing the virus. And we've got plenty of evidence that shows that environments, I think one was a school that was held over the summer where it was a church with a choir where the heating system was actually shut down. So there was no air moving at all. And showed that 53 of 65 choir members got the COVID. Harvard research is saying in public spaces, they recommend that the total air is replaced 4 to 6 times an hour. And there's a whole lot of ventilation systems out there in the world today that don't come near that. It's recirculating current air. So, by the way, the stat in the Wall Street Journal said 41% of schools need to update the HVAC system. I use that term HVAC. That's heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems. That covers all of the systems. And so, so an issue in the science that they haven't settled yet, and it's amazing all the science not settled around COVID, is whether it's droplets or aerosols that's the problem. If it's droplets, ventilation systems don't help much. They're large, they drop to surfaces, they stay active on surfaces for a while. They don't go very far, obviously. They can't travel very far because they're heavy. And so, it's immediate contact, within a few feet. But if it's aerosols, then it can be picked up by the ventilation system, spread throughout the building, and then it's a big deal. By the way, as a friend of mine reminded me this morning, where have we heard of this before? Well, remember Legionnaire's disease? Legionnaires in the hotel, and almost everybody in the hotel got infected with it, and many people died. The water cooling towers, remember, on top of the building, had developed some mold in there, and that was spread through the ventilation system, the entire building. So we've been there before, and this may be a big opportunity. This is difficult to work with. In my own home, some people are saying, well, you put a HEPA filter in your furnace. Well, most systems can't handle the HEPA filters, which really confine the airflow, really reduce the airflow through a system, and that's very hard on blowers and the system. And I've had recommendations from professionals saying don't ever do that. So I can't simply put a high flow filter, and school systems, I think, are faced with the same issue. By the way, so we'll go buy a HEPA filter. That's one of the ways to do it. Well, think about schools doing this. So I went and looked up in Amazon. So a medical grade HEPA filter, by the way, this is changeable filters. You keep having to change filters. Covers 840 square foot. By the way, that's the size of a bedroom, a small bedroom, is $270. So if you're taking a classroom, I got to imagine most classrooms are 2,000 square feet. So we're talking 2 to 3 of these to cover a classroom. So $1,000 a classroom. And then how do you cover hallways, cafeterias, and so on? So adding HEPA filters is an expensive proposition. In my home alone, I'd have to probably put 3 of these in my house. So $900 or so, and then start buying filters. And by the way, an observation, you hear about the teachers' unions and staff going back to school, and you hear about masks. Have you heard anything about your local school districts about rework ventilation systems, that they've been working hard and they've changed, or they bought HEPA filters, they're going to put them in place? Have you heard anything? I'm going to push back on my school district and see what people have heard on that. This is a case where maybe masks have hurt us, and hear me out on this, and give me your feedback. We all of a sudden determined that social distancing was the issue. So if we could just social distance, we'd solve this problem, and then simply put masks on. And masks has been the entire issue. Everybody, they didn't have a mask on. We had another story yesterday. Nancy Pelosi's in a place with one other guy. He's got the mask on and she doesn't have his mask on. And we make it all about masks. And so what we do is we shut off further conversation about how to control this virus, because masks and social distances is all we need to do. When in fact, the experts are saying we ought to look further, and ventilation systems is one thing we ought to do. And so we've actually stopped looking, in my mind, and said, let's make sure we get PPE and we get masks. And by the way, hospitals was a huge problem. They learned the lesson early on about ventilation systems and positive ventilation, and really was working on it. They understood ventilation systems very well because of, their confined areas that they have and have to separate surgery from recovery and so on. But I think I wonder in the school systems if we've ignored that and going to pay the price because of that. Next article: universities have kept athletic and recreational fees in tuition, even though both are closed. So the students, and I'm going to reach out to a couple of my grandchildren that are in college and see if that happened to them, but they're getting their initial tuition fees for this fall that, by the way, most haven't been modified at all, even though they're now spending no time on campus. These buildings are shut down. They're not being cleaned on a regular basis. There's got to be cost savings for these universities, but so far, no way. They're still getting a full tuition bill. But on these tuition bills, there's line items for recreational fees when, in fact, they're not at the university, or if they are, the recreational fees are all shut down and closed. And for athletic fees, which typically pays for tickets to, go watch the football team, so on. And by the way, these are hundreds of dollars. These aren't minor little fees. And all athletics are shut down. So, my observation is when at the board meetings, in the management meetings at the universities, when they were discussing what they were going to do with tuitions, didn't these ever come up? And how was it missed? And I think I've got an answer, as I usually do for all this nonsense, is they're out of touch. And how are they out of touch? They don't act as a customer of their own business, their own product. They don't act as a customer. So they don't look at what they do as a customer. And when they fail to do that, they miss it. You would think somebody would look and say, we're going to send a bill out to a customer and charge them an athletic fee. And meanwhile, we've shut the whole athletic system down. This doesn't make sense. Call it something else, lie about it, do something, but this doesn't make sense at all. But they're out of touch. And I really say businesses need occasionally to step out of their management role and to step into the customer role and walk into their businesses. I always like that TV program. I forgot the name of it. Somebody will remind me. But Undercover Boss, right? Go in your business and look around like a customer would look. And it's amazing what they see, right? And now undercover, they went in as an employee. But as a base level employee, the other employees talked to them and said, this is what's going on. And I remember one of them at a resort, and people were checking into the resort, and it was taking 20 minutes to check in people at the resort because the system was so screwed up. And it's amazing, this executive had never seen that before and never knew the lines of people and how frustrated they were to check into this resort because it was taking so long. But I mean, there were many stories like that. But out of touch management, they don't look like their customer looks. Foldable phones have been released. So Samsung Galaxy's released the Z Fold 2, Zebra Fold 2. $2,000 foldable phone, 7.6-inch display. By the way, they're not the first. Razer's been out there with one, and then Huawei, the Chinese manufacturer's been out there too. And there's about almost 2 million foldable phones in production right now that have been out there. Much more popular in Asia than in the US. Intriguing to me, I kind of like the idea. Samsung's had a real problem with that foldable phone. By the way, that's why this is called version 2. Version 1 had a lot of issues with multiple folds breaking the display, and and creating display issues. And supposedly they've got that resolved, but I don't know. We'll see. They said they tested up to 200,000 folds, 250,000 folds on a phone. That probably ought to last you 2 or 3 years, I would think. But it is an intriguing concept. You have a smaller phone, but a larger display when you wanted it. So it's intriguing to me. We'll see if it happens. And last one for today, retail evictions. So states have had moratoriums on evictions in retail establishments, and those are ending right now. A lot of those, unless they extend them like California did with renters, those are ending up right now on the books. And they had one example in Miami, a Saks Fifth Avenue store in the Ball Harbor shopping center. It's an upscale shopping area. So this is not, wrong side of town, cheap environment. This is high end. Saks owns $1 million in back rent for that property since February of last year. And now they're going to obviously be evicted if they don't come up with that back rent. And so an observation I've had is, so how much has this rent-free policy kept certain businesses in place that would have naturally folded months ago because they can't make their rent and they would have been evicted? So watch for this coming forward. I think a lot of businesses are going to choose to say, well, we can't pay that rent. $2 million is a lot of money. It's a high-end store, but that's a lot of money. And now we'll just say, well, we'll lay off the employees and shut the building down now that, we couldn't. It's cheaper to keep some retail stores open if you're not paying for any of the infrastructure. If the rent is free, then a little bit of business may keep you alive and keep you paying for your employees, plus some federal help in paying for the employees. So we'll see if that's a sign of some more layoffs to come. I still think an observation I'd make is we're still going to see a number of layoffs in a number of businesses, restaurants, bars, certain stores that just can't keep it. I was in a restaurant, P.F. Chang's, this weekend. That's a huge restaurant. There were 7 tables occupied, and this was Sunday afternoon. 7 tables, and I started thinking through. There's a bartender, there's a couple waiters, there's the staff back in the back, and then the staff up front. Real tough to keep a restaurant open for 7 tables at a time, but we'll see. So, hey, thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed it, and look forward to reading your comments and getting your feedback. Cheers.